Jai Guru Shivaram. Haribo.
So today, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, 7th chapter, and we're going to read 2 verses, just because I felt that the purport of the second verse was very important. Today, reading Srimad Bhagavatam, 1, 7, 36, and 37. First canto, 7th chapter, and we're going to read 2 verses, just because somehow I'm getting an echo. I don't know if someone mute there. I'm getting an echo back. So we'll begin with the 1:7:36. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, I'll just read the verse quickly since we don't have a whole lot of time and we won't repeat. Matam pramatam unmatam sutta balam striyam jadam papanam viratham vitam naripum hanti dharmavit. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. A person who knows the principles of religion does not kill an enemy who is careless, intoxicated, insane, asleep, afraid, or devoid of his chariot. Nor does he kill a boy, a woman, a foolish creature, or a surrendered soul. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. An enemy who does not resist is never killed by a warrior who knows the principles of religion. Formerly, battles were fought on the principles of religion and not for the sake of sense gratification. If an enemy happened to be intoxicated, asleep, etc., as above mentioned, he was never killed. These are some of the codes of religious war. Formerly, war was never declared by the whims of selfish political leaders. It was carried out on religious principles free from all vices. Violence carried out on religious principles is far superior to so-called non-violence. Om Jnanatimidam Tasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakatah Mahim Dharati Shvaparantikam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschat Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shiva Shri Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So just to speak a little bit on this first verse, the principles of religion. So here, of course, we know the circumstance that Krishna has Arjuna was very angry, but he was willing to take Ashwatthama back to the military camp. But Krishna said, no, kill him. And this is Krishna's reason why to kill him. And this will also be carried on to the next verse. You don't kill someone if they're resisting or they're insane. So actually Krishna is giving the in an indirect way the reason why Arjuna ultimately kills him but doesn't kill him. Otherwise he has to be killed because of his killing these a boy. But on the other hand, Ashwatthama falls into many of these categories: careless, insane, you know, devoid of his chariot, foolish creature. You know. So therefore, on the other hand, he should not be killed. And so Arjuna, of course, Krishna is preparing Arjuna to take a decision based on higher understanding of religious principles, which is kill him and don't kill him. But here it's being emphasized that you should kill someone, and the codes of religious war. Formerly, war was never declared by whims of selfish political leaders. It was carried out on religious principles, free from all vices. Of course, here we're talking about the highest form of war, which was fought in Kurukshetra, which was fought in the Ramayana. Srila Prabhupada cites these two as the greatest wars on the planet, and they were both won by Vaishnavas. So this is the power of the Vaishnava, that when there's a real war, Srila Prabhupada said there are two types of wars. There is a religious a war based on the codes of religious principles, and there is a war based on dog and cat fighting. So the dog and cat fighting wars, these are the ones declared by the whims of selfish political leaders. And wars that follow the codes of religion are like Krishna ordering the Pandavas that, yes, you must fight. Krishna creating these circumstances. But even up to a few hundred years ago, wars were conducted in a more orderly fashion. Otherwise, two armies came together on a certain place, and they fought, and they didn't, bomb thousands or millions of innocent people. And of course, Srila Prabhupada makes this point in previous verses with the Brahmastra. Brahmastra, it's a very efficient weapon. Of course, in this case, the two Brahmastras, which is a few verses before this, they were so powerful that they were disturbing the universe, especially Arjuna's, because it was empowered by Krishna. So, but the point is that even as far as I can see, even the US, and of course, in the US, we saw yesterday that war or violence declared on the whims of political leaders. We saw it physically here in the USA, the foolishness, how people can be incited on the basis of cats and dogs. I'm defending, what were all those people there? Defending sense gratification. And of course, the people on the other side are also defending looking for sense gratification. We want this type of sense gratification. No, better this type of sense gratification. No, Trump sense gratification or Biden sense gratification. So, but it's the same thing as Srila Prabhupada said, wet stool, dry stool. They both have their utility, but it's the same thing, the two sides of a coin, etc. So Srila Prabhupada said that these, because of the cat and dog wars, America, I think, was one of the first places to start subversive wars, meaning instead of standing up, because they didn't have an army as powerful as the British Army, so they started guerrilla type tactics, attacking at night, attacking without challenging the enemy face to face, etc. But anyway, that's another subject. But the point is, when the wars are conducted as cat and dog wars, otherwise fighting over sense gratification, then the result is that people abhor war. And when people abhor war, then they'll take the side of Arjuna, his initial arguments. Yes, here is this warmongering God again that we found in the Bible and the Quran, and here he is, he was there before in the Vedas, just wanting war. Because they're thinking that war is so bad because it disturbs my sense gratification. And therefore, this artificial peace, which people think that they have nowadays for sense gratification. They even give up Krishna consciousness for sense gratification. So many people, they give up. We were discussing this yesterday, that so many people give up Krishna consciousness because they don't understand that whatever is happening to me is my karma. And if I'm trying to become a devotee, whatever's happening to me is due to my reduced karma, plus Krishna intervening through his energies, Parashashaktir Vibhidaya Vishuyate, through his energies to help the person overcome the obstacles of attachment and the obstacles of that are keeping them from approaching pure devotional service. So that definitely can disturb our sense gratification. And if we're too much attached to sense gratification, we'll give preference to the sense gratification and forget about the most important thing. So this war based on religious principles, Srila Prabhupada says here, that type of war is violence carried out on religious principles is superior to so-called non-violence. So he's making this point that the non-violence that people want, even George Bernard Shaw was able to understand that war, one of the main causes of war, as he said, that war raises its ugly head when there is slaughtering animals, killing and converting our bodies into graveyards, then the inevitable result is war. And Srila Prabhupada makes this point again and again, that of all the sinful activities, the worst is sense gratification on the basis of eating meat, killing animals. And therefore, that's because of that, I wanted to read the next verse, so I will do that because of the purport more than anything. Although Srila Prabhupada, he spoke on these two verses and he emphasized the first verse, which I will also do, but I wanted to bring into context some of the aspects of this verse 37. So I'll read the verse quickly. Swapranam ya para pranay prapushnat ya grina khala tadbadastasya hi shreyo yad doshadyat yadhapumam. Translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. A cruel and wretched person who maintains his existence at the cost of others' lives deserves to be killed for his own well-being. Otherwise, he will go down by his own actions. Now we can see from this Srila Prabhupada's translation that living at the cost of others' lives. So here Srila Prabhupada, he's going to focus on what? On animal killers. So now we'll read the purport by Srila Prabhupada. A life is just punishment for a person who is cruelly and shamelessly lives at the cost of another's life. Of course, we all do that. Even we do at the cost of the lives of vegetables and fruits and fruit seeds who are potential trees, grains, etc. And of course, because each grain is a seed of a living entity, and that's one of the main forms that living entities descend in the form of grains. Therefore, grains are considered to be that grains especially have to be offered to Krishna, especially very carefully offered to Krishna because they contain life in a very concentrated form. So we do that, but we offer it to Krishna. Otherwise, other people are also doing it, but it's not so cruel and shameless because the level of consciousness of a vegetable is very, very low, but the level of consciousness of an animal, what to speak of the cow, who is the most emotional of all creatures, it's very sinful, what to speak of a human being. And because Krishna loves the cows, and the cows need protection, even their protection and killing them is actually, in one sense, more sinful than killing a human being. Political morality is to punish a person by a death sentence in order to save a cruel person from going to hell. Now, in Mexico, of course, that's part of my area of responsibility. They have no capital punishment. And just the foolishness that Srila Prabhupada is condemning. Otherwise, they have to maintain a criminal, a hardened criminal, someone who kills someone else. They have to maintain them for 20, 30 years or their whole life. It will cost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to maintain such a person. And so here, Srila Prabhupada is saying political morality, the real moral and ethical position, is to help that person. Just like Krishna liberated all the soldiers just because he was on the battlefield. Prabhupada says not only were they liberated, but svarupyam, they actually attained their original spiritual forms. Everyone on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So Srila Prabhupada makes the point, whether Krishna is cruel or Krishna is smiling at you or Krishna is angry at you, the result is always beneficial. That a murderer is condemned to death sentence by the state is good for the culprit, because in his next life he will not have to suffer his act of murder. There's a verse which I'm just going to look at. I don't know the verse. Coming from some Smriti Shastra, quoted by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Rajabir Drita Dandas tu Kvitva Papani Manava Viduta Kalmasha Yanti Swargam Sukritino Yataha. Those who have committed sin, if punished by the king, become freed from sin and go to Swarga like the pious. If he is not killed because of that sin, Yad, he goes to hell. So this is the Shastra is confirming what Srila Prabhupada is saying here. Such a death sentence for the murderer is the lowest possible punishment offered to him. And it is said in the Smriti Shastras that men who are punished by the king on the principle of a life for a life are purified of all their sins. So much so that they may be eligible to be promoted to the planets of heaven. According to Manu, the greatest author of civic codes and religious principles, even the killer of an animal is to be considered murderer, because animal food is never meant for civilized man. So, whose prime duty is to prepare himself for going back to Godhead. So Srila Prabhupada at one point had an argument with Dr. Patel, because Dr. Patel was saying Vaishnavas can never accept meat eating. And Prabhupada said, well, the Vedas allow it. And of course, Dr. Patel immediately, fervently said, no, it cannot be allowed. Vaishnava does not. And Prabhupada said, yes, Vaishnavas, we don't kill animals. We don't eat animals. But the Vedas allow under circumstances. And of course, Dr. Patel argued. And at the end of the conversation, Dr. Patel said, Guruji, and Prabhupada said, do not call me Guru. No, if you don't accept what I say, and he says, no, I accept you as Guru. And Prabhupada said, no, Guru means you have to accept, otherwise he's not Guru. So anyway, it was interesting. It's an interesting conversation. I recommend it to read it, when you have time in conversations, morning walks. So now here, he says that in the act of killing an animal, there is a regular conspiracy by the part of sinners, and all of them are liable to be punished as murderers, exactly like a party of conspirators who kill a human being combinedly. Now here, Srila Prabhupada sees conspiracy. Of course, I looked up the word conspiracy in Srila Prabhupada's folio, and the most he speaks about conspiracy, the two things is animal killing and the shamataka jewel, the conspiracy, because it's conspiring against Krishna, because conspire literally means to come together and agree on something. So I mean, that in that sense, Srila Prabhupada uses the word many times in a very ordinary way, just coming together and agreeing on something. But here Srila Prabhupada says, these are the worst conspirators in the world. He who gives permission, he who kills the animal, he who sells the slaughtered animal, he who cooks the animal, he who administers distribution of the foodstuff, and at last, he who eats such cooked animal food are all murderers, and all of them are liable to be punished by the laws of nature. No one can create a living being despite all advancement of material science, and therefore no one has the right to kill a living being by one's independent whims. So here Srila Prabhupada gives a very wonderful argument about animal killing. He's basically saying, okay, if you can create a life by your own intelligence and capabilities, then, just like Krishna, he has the right to manifest life, or at least in this world, because of course Krishna says we're all eternal. But within this world, Krishna can create the life, meaning instill the body with the soul, put the soul in the body, and he can take it away. Because he did the first, he can do the second. But if you can't do the first, you don't have the right to do the second, unless you're following the codes of religion, which are given by Krishna. For animal eaters, the scriptures have sanctioned restricted animal sacrifices only, and such sanctions are there just to restrict the opening of slaughterhouses and not to encourage animal killing. The procedure under which animal sacrifice is allowed in the scriptures is good for both the animal sacrificed and the animal eaters. Now, of course, there are places where Srila Prabhupada says that, if you kill a goat, you have to whisper into the ear that now you can kill me in the next life. So that's not so wonderful. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada says the animal eater is saved from grosser types of sins. And the animal eater is saved from grosser types of sins, eating meats supplied by organized slaughterhouses, which are ghastly places for breeding all kinds of material afflictions to society, country, and people in general. So it's not like the animal is benefited more than the animal eater, because the animal gets a human life, and the animal eater, at least he doesn't have to suffer the sins of conspiring to kill, being one of those persons, that killed the animal, that procured the animal, that raised the animal, that transported the animal, that cooked the animal, killed the animal, that cooked the animal, and that ate the animal. So this type of animal, killing and eating, sanctioned in the Vedas for some people who are not civilized, as Srila Prabhupada says, then they can, at least they're not eating meat like that. Otherwise, Srila Prabhupada is saying here that people who go to the grocery store and eat meat, they're acquiring so many sins. One time a devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, why is it that India is so underdeveloped when they have more piety, and the US, they're killing animals? This is an American devotee. We could also apply that even more to Brazil, because in Brazil is the biggest exporter of meat in the world. But anyway, so the devotee said that, and Prabhupada said, no, because in India, they know better and they still do it. He said, in America, they do not know. Therefore, there may be some concession, meaning a general, but still, it's creating so much, just like we saw yesterday in Washington, D.C. I'm sure most of those people are not devotees. The material world is itself a place always full of anxieties. Param patam yad vipatam natesham. Always danger at every step. And by encouraging animal slaughter, the whole atmosphere becomes polluted more and more by war, pestilence, famine, and many other calamities, unwanted calamities. So Srila Prabhupada said one time that if you simply stop this animal slaughter in your country, meaning the US, he was speaking in America, he said, it will become just like Vaikuntha. And in another place, he said, that way Krishna consciousness can flourish. Of course, in Europe, I don't know, I never heard much more about it, but in Europe, many years ago, they had decided to, that they made I think it was by 2050, they decided that Europe should go completely vegan. Of course, they weren't doing it to stop the animal slaughter. They're doing it for environmental reasons. But if they do that, then it will definitely, of course, they'll probably not allow milk production. So we'll have to preach to the European leaders so that they can do both things at once. But the point is that Prabhupada said that this killing of the animals is definitely the most sinful, the most difficult, the most miserable, creates the most miserable conditions. But there are many verses that speak about these things, just like in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, tapashocham daya satyam itipada krite kritaha adharmam shaish tayo bhagna. That tapashocham taya, there's the four principles, pillars of religion: austerity, cleanliness, truthfulness, mercy. These four legs were manifest in Satya Yuga, but adharma shaistayo bhagna. In this age, 3 of them have been destroyed. Otherwise, he was seeing the cow resting, the bull resting on one leg. Smaya sangamadais tava. And so, how are they broken? Smaya, pride; sangha, too much association with the opposite sex. Prabhupada says women, but I tried to modernize it a little bit due to the mentality of modern mentality of equality, just so people may feel better, although the equality is not there on the external platform. Madai, intoxication. These 3 things will result from the 3 broken legs. And so this is the Bhagavatam. And so, of course, the Bhagavatam also says, as Srila Prabhupada emphasizes in his purport, that there is some concession. Otherwise, the tendency, Prabhupada said, because we have 2 canine teeth, there is a slight tendency, and a greater tendency among uncivilized people, which is practically the whole world. If we talk about Vaishnava religious principles, sometimes devotees become confused because they see some devotees, they have very bad habits, where they may see some materialistic persons with very good habits. But as the Bhagavatam says, that what's that verse? I can't think of it right now. Hare Krishna. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, the verse, I just went blank in my head. But anyway, it says that Sarvar Gunesh Tatra Samasade Sura, that if you're a devotee, Yashatma Bhaktir Bhagavati Kinchana, and if you're a Kinchana devotee, then all good qualities will manifest within you. But what's the next line? Damodar Maharaj, I can't remember the next line for some reason. Harava Bhaktasya Kato Mahadguna. But if you're devoid of bhakti, you may have all good qualities, but you will simply, at the best, you will remain on the mental platform, just hovering. Prabhupada says, hovering on the mental platform. So, but the Vedas are reasonable. Even the Bhagavatam is reasonable. No, it says, "Loke vamiyami sha madhya seva." That these three things: sex life, amisha, eating meat, and madhya, intoxication. These things always nityam hi jantor nahi tatra chodana. These things have always existed, and therefore there are laws to govern these things. So, what are those laws? Vivastitihi. People can get can there's arrangement of vivaha, jagya. They can get married, or suragrahaya. They can take ritualistic cups of wine, which means only certain people, not everyone. No, and yagya, they can offer animals in sacrifice. So if these things are allowed, but under restricted conditions. But in Kali Yuga, as the Bhagavatam announces, that tataish chanudinam dharma satyam shocham kshamadaya kalena balina rajan nangshadhyahur balam shritihi. In the Bhagavatam, it says that day by day, the religious principles will be reduced, and especially satyam, truthfulness, cleanliness, mercy, and austerity will be reduced by kalina balina, by the great force of time, of Kali Yuga. And therefore, people will lose all good qualities, especially their strength and their memory. Otherwise, strength in this case means determination, balam, the determination to be strong in spiritual life. And we can see that. Many people are attracted to even to chanting a little bit, or to some things about our movement. But as far as following the four regulative principles, as Srila Prabhupada spoke about his godbrother who went to England, and then the viceroy, I think it was Lord Shetland, who had been a viceroy in India, he was attracted to the Vedic principles. He said, "Can you make me a Brahmin?" He said, "No." Ban Maharaj said, "Of course. Well, what do I have to do? Just follow these principles." And the viceroy said, "Impossible. Right? Impossible." So this is the situation in Kali Yuga, that we have a hard time understanding the import. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada, so this is the point that Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing in this purport, that you cannot kill animals. You can't do these things and just get away with it just on the basis of sense gratification. Now, the thing that Srila Prabhupada himself emphasized in these two verses were the first words of the first verse that we read, matam pramatam unmatam. No, these are progressively more serious. Matam, careless person. No, a careless person. Careless person basically means like the great majority of people in the present age. They're careless. They don't understand religious principles. They're not necessarily, therefore Srila Prabhupada said, they're not demons, they're just ignorant. They're not innocent either. Prabhupada said even children in Kali Yuga, we shouldn't think that children are just innocent. There is a certain degree of innocence, but they're ignorant. They're covered by ignorance by taking birth in the material world. So we sometimes see them as innocent because their karma, when they're first born, their karma is not manifest. They've just come out of the womb. They have the last few months in the womb, they were given a vision of their past sinful activities, And therefore they start making promises according to the third canto of the Bhagavatam. I won't do that again. I won't do that again. But then as soon as they come out, somebody, oh, isn't he cute? Look at her little beautiful features. And of course, when they first come out, they're not so beautiful. Only the mother would think so. Maybe the father, covered with blood and crying. But if you're the father or the mother, you'll think they're beautiful. If you're not, then you'll think, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into here? But then attachment takes over and they become more beautiful. And they seem to be innocent because they're still, they have no ability to perform sinful activity. But as soon as that ability develops, then the child, then that karma starts becoming manifest. The first manifestation of karma is ahankara. We see children by false ego, they demand, if they don't get what they want, they cry, kind of like our president, he's kind of like a 8-year-old child. If he doesn't get what he wants, he yells out and cries, and so false ego, then intelligence manifests, then the mind manifests, and then the attachments of the senses through karma manifest, and the child becomes increasingly more involved in material energy. So anyway, that's another subject. So the point is that Prabhupada said mattam, a small degree of craziness, and then there's pramatam, pramatam, which the Bhagavatam speaks about so many times, nunam pramata kurute vikarma, very famous verse spoken by Rishabhadev, that people are mad. Why? Because of vikarma, because of attachment to sinful activities or activities that don't follow the codes of religion. Yad indriya pritaya aprinoti. Why is this? Because of indriya pritaya. The senses and the objects of the senses are very dear to them. Of course, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was speaking to Prakashananda Saraswati, he spoke about this principle in a different way. He said that itambrata nama priya, instead of being indriya priya or indriya pritaya, you should be nama priya. You should be very attached to this holy name. And of course, he said, my spiritual master said this particular verse of the Bhagavatam is the essence of the whole Bhagavatam, making the holy name very dear to ourselves. Instead of indriya prita, nama priya. And then nasadu manye yata atmano mayam. This is not very good. Why? Asanapi kleshata asha deha. Because I have this material body. Now someone may argue, well, yeah, body's temporary, therefore I'll enjoy it for a while. And then when I get old, just like Srila Prabhupada in his famous interview with one reporter, the reporter says, why are you inducing all these young people who are at the height of their possibility to enjoy life? You're telling them to renounce. That should be done when they're older. So Prabhupada said, what is old? And he said, well, advanced in age. Prabhupada said, old means you are very near death. So yeah, the reporter accepted. Yeah, okay, I accept that. So Prabhupada said, so when will you die? He said, I don't know. Prabhupada said, could be tomorrow. Well, I can't remember the exact, I'm paraphrasing. He said, yes. So therefore you are near death, and you should also take this Krishna consciousness very seriously. So Prabhupada was so expert, unbelievably expert. So even though the body is temporary, Rishabhadev says, it will cause you so many problems. It is the main instrument to help us understand the nature of this material world. Therefore, our body is always giving us some problem, a cough, a sneeze, it's tired, it's hungry, it has to go to the bathroom, always a disturbance, which is why Rupa Goswami says, Kamadinam, that the actions of the senses and the attachment of the senses and the kama, the desire to enjoy the senses, these senses have become my master. They control me, and so this body and its senses, and then even if you somehow or another become a little disciplined, then there's the mind, and then there's the intelligence. Even though one may have a disciplined mind, the intelligence tries to dominate that by figuring everything out by myself. And even if you figure things out by yourself, a false ego will always induce the intelligence to think that I'm always right. As the saying goes, I only made one mistake in my life. I thought that I made a mistake. So this is materialistic consciousness. So then Rishabdev, what does he say? Parabhavastava bodhijato. That if you have this distorted indriya pritaya mentality, then javan na jigyasata atmatattvam, then you'll never, and you don't understand atmatattva, then sharira bandha, you will be attached one birth after another. You'll be within this samsara until you can get out of it. And therefore and then he goes on to say that unless you do this, you will be engaged in deha yoga. Namuchate deha yogena tavat. Unless you direct your senses to Mai Vasudeva, to me, Rishabdev said, to me, I'm Vasudev. Or not the Guru Prasad Swami, but the Vasudev, to Rishabdev. To me, then you will be practicing Deha Yoga, or yoga of the body, yoga of taking care of this body. Now, Prahlad Maharaj, one of my famous verses in the Bhagavatam by Prahlad Maharaj, he says that, very interesting how to understand Deha Yoga. Deha Yoga, what is the result of Deha Yoga, the yoga of worshiping the body? Well, Yasmat Priya Viyoga Sam Yoga Janma. He says, very curious how this material world is, because Priya, what does the material world do generally? Priya Viyoga and Apriya Samyoga. Priya, I become the things that I like, Viyoga, I'm separated from them. And Apriya Samyogam. And the things that I don't like, there's somehow or another, I'm always joined with them, even though I try to do the opposite. I spend my whole life, Shokagnina Sakala Jonasu Dahyamana. I spend my whole life lamenting and in the fire of suffering. And then Prahlad Maharaj says something so wonderful. Dukaushatam tadapi dukam atadhyam. He says, because the reality is the effort to avoid suffering is usually greater than the suffering in itself. We make so many arrangements. Maya sukha, in another verse, he says, Mayam sukhayam varam daho vimudham. That materialistic people, Maya sukhaya, who are trying to enjoy illusory happiness, they make so many big arrangements for that. It takes up so much time and energy. To enjoy life, you have to get more and more facilities. Of course, according to our position in society, we need more or less facility. An ant what does it need? A little grain of sugar. An elephant needs 100 kilos. A king needs a palace. So we should take that facility that we need, but we should never forget the real purpose of life, which is to become attached to the lotus feet of Krishna, nirbandha Krishna sambandhe, by become detached from this world by becoming more and more attached to Krishna. And therefore Krishna Katha is so important. So then, So then Prahlad Maharaj says, Bhumam Brahmati Badame Tabadasya Yogam. I want to do Dasya Yoga. So either we do Deha Yoga or Dasya Yoga. We do the yoga of being, thinking myself a material body, or the yoga of thinking myself Dasya, the servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We can choose what type of yoga I want. And then, of course, Rishabdev, he speaks one of his famous verses. Then he says that, well, of course, leading up to that, he says that even if someone is very wise, if they can't understand that trying to get sense gratification is really useless, and forgetting about what is really good for them, they try to be happy by mitunyam agaram. They try to be happy by sexual intercourse and having a nice house, having a nice family. Of course, those things are good, but you have to engage them in Krishna service. A nice family, nice home, you make your home Krishna conscious, you have your deities, you engage your family in Krishna consciousness, you provide for them, you bring facilities so that there has to be some enjoyment. Otherwise, if there's no enjoyment, then one becomes frustrated. There's no accompanying enjoyment for people in general, then they just become frustrated. As Chanakya Pandit said, that abject poverty takes away all one's good qualities. Otherwise, if you don't have some degree of comfort, even Prabhupada needed a certain degree of comfort, meaning quiet for his translation. Even a pure devotee of that stature needs some facility. So we all need some facility that gives some comfort to the mind or the body or the intellect, so that we can perform Krishna consciousness. So of course, a pure devotee on the highest platform doesn't need that comfort. But even Gorkishore Das Babaji, he refused to go to Calcutta and get it cured. His eyes, he was going blind. He refused to go because he thought this will disturb my bhajan. So even someone that renounced has certain conditions, necessary conditions. So that's why. But if we become too attached to the conditions and not attached to using those conditions to acquire Krishna consciousness, then we become frustrated. So anyway, then of course Rishabdev speaks his famous verse, that Striya Pumsam Mituni Bhavametam, that this whole thing is generated by the combination of man and woman, meaning the combination of man and woman who tie the knot of material existence, not the combination of man and woman who live together to be Krishna conscious. And there'll be attachments, there'll be arguments, there'll be difficulties, but their main purpose is to be Krishna conscious. Otherwise, because of what? Aho griha kshetra sutapta vitayar. Because it's a series of things, one leading to another. Aho griha. First, you have to have a home, just like Srila Prabhupada telling the story of the sadhu whose 2 pieces of cloth are being eaten by a mouse. He gets a cat, then to feed the cat he needs a cow, then to take care of the cow he needs a wife, and the wife needs a house. So he said, better I tolerate the rat. An easier process. But even if you do the more difficult process, it has to be done for Krishna. Because once you have house, griha kshetra, you have to have a way to type of work, activity. Griha kshetra, sutta apta, then you will have children and you'll have parents, and vita, you have to have money to do all this. So that initial attachment creates all these other attachments. And therefore we have to offer those attachments in the service of Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada, he referred to one verse, famous verse in the Bhagavatam, Dehapatya kalatra jishvatma saineshva satsvapi tesham pramata nidhanam pashanapi na pashati. Famous verse. And Prabhupada dissected that verse, which I don't have time to do in the limited time that we have now. But basically he said, if you're attached to the body creates so many difficulties. If you're attached to deha apatya, the children, our kalatra, wife, atma saineshvasa, and you see them as these are the things that will, that will save me, that will protect me. I have my body, I take nice care of my body, I have my children, I have my wife, and they'll all take care of me. And the whole story of Paranjan in the Bhagavatam is to show that that will not happen. Atma saineshvara. They are asatswapi. They are fallible. Asat. They are fallible soldiers. Because why? Because when you depend on something in this material world, you can't tesham pramata. You become maddened and you can't see nidhanam, the ultimate destruction, which will destruction of the body, the fact that we will be separated from all these attachments once we die. I was explaining to someone yesterday that Srila Prabhupada said in his last few weeks, he said, the pain that comes from death, he was explaining what he was going through. The pain that comes from, dying is not the worst thing, because if you get too much pain, you will go into coma, or people will give you drugs to stop the pain. But the worst thing is, if you don't give up your attachments, then you'll have to take another body. So this is the situation in the material world. And therefore, the conclusion is that this pramata, and then pramata, Prabhupada said pramata means madness, but unmatam, which is the third progression, means totally insane. Totally insane. People want to become insane by intoxication, by so many, by lack of sanity, thinking oneself this material body. This is also, that's matta, and dedicating everything to the pleasure of this body. That's pramata, and trying to extract pleasure at every cost in the abject mode of ignorance is unmata. Very, very, totally insane. So this is the condition of the people in the material world. They've become insane. And of course, then that insanity, and then this is speaking more about the previous verse, that causes you to do crazy things, killing, it causes you to become bewildered in this material world. So someone who's that bewildered or in one of these categories should never be punished. I mean, they may be punished, but you don't kill them. You may discipline them, but you don't kill them, because they're not in a natural state. They cannot see things clearly. A child cannot see things clearly. And of course, included here, unfortunately for, we're all in one of these categories. So also having a woman's body, they're supposed to be protected. Older people are supposed to be protected. Foolish people are supposed to be protected. And therefore you don't kill them, because they have to be. One time Srila Prabhupada, I'm just going to conclude with this, Srila Prabhupada in a class in Los Angeles, he was, I can't remember which verse it was, but it was talking about how women and children and old people should be protected. And Prabhupada looked at the ladies and he said, therefore, the ladies because they are supposed to be protected, they cannot be chastised. In other words, they cannot be punished, chastised. And then Prabhupada looked at them, opened his eyes, and he said, but don't take advantage. Because if you take advantage and try to, justify not being chastised because I'm supposed to be protected, then you can be chastised. Even in Vedic system, although women were protected, sometimes they were chastised. So anyway, there's a lot of points in this verse, and I've exhausted my time limit. So I don't know, according to the powers that be, if you can allow a few minutes for questions, if there are any. That depends on, I'm just a servant here, so.
Yeah, we can take some questions. Anyone who wants to ask a question, they can either unmute themselves or raise their hand, and in that way we will know who wants. But I do want to ask Damaraj Swami to give some kind of input. So Maharaj, if you wanted to say something, you have to unmute yourself.
Sometimes very busy and devotees absorbed in so much service or Krishna consciousness, sometimes they may be doing something else momentarily, even during the class. That's why in the GBC meeting, they tell us we have to keep our picture there, so we know that you're not doing something, you're not reading messages on your cell phone during the GBC meeting.
No, I'm good. I'm good. I was listening
there he is.
with great attention. I just I had to go back to the Zoom button in order to unmute myself. What can I say? I mean, I always like classes where a lot of shlokas are referred to, and most of the verses you referred to, all of us should know. They're all very important verses, and yeah, in when well, I don't really have any comment. I mean, the innocent are not to be punished. Well, you said the kids they seem innocent because they don't as yet have the ability to perform sinful actions. But I mean, what if the parents feed them meat and even that of course the punishment was tremendously exaggerated. Therefore, Yamaraj had to become Vidura, which is not that bad. But that sage that Yamaraj was going to almost punished horribly by lancing him with a spear. All he did when he was a child, he stuck a little needle-like vegetation in the body of an insect. So children could be pretty sinful sometimes. It seems, and not a major point. But I'd love to have a 2-hour comment on yesterday's chaos in Washington D.C., but that will not be feasible. I guess many would consider that very fortunate that it won't be feasible. But that's all I have to say right now. Hare Krishna.
We could do that on another discussion platform.
A teetering platform.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Well, there is a question here in the chat from Vrindavanath, Trinidad. It says, how devotees should understand and apply Manu Samhita? There are certain, Srila Prabhupada said, we cannot apply the whole Manu Samhita because they're just like we can't apply in the present context of Kali Yuga, we can't apply even the Hari Bhakti Vilas. Otherwise, we would spend all day doing all kinds of little rituals just to be able to chant our Gayatri mantra, or it's like so many details. So we apply the general principles. So the same with Manu Samhita. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada quotes some Manu Samhita in the general principles of governing mankind. And of course, if this golden age brings society closer to Krishna consciousness, then we could apply more principles of Manu Samhita. But the general principles, especially the ones that are outlined by Srila Prabhupada, we should try to apply them. And the same as Hari Bhakti Vilas, those principles of Hari Bhakti Vilas, we should we should apply them accordingly. Okay, here's a question. You advise that while one may have family and home, etc., one is required to use it in Krishna consciousness. How can we identify warning signs when there is a mission drift, when while in family life we are losing direction of keeping the family absorbed in Krishna consciousness? Well, I would say if you're sitting in front of the television for 4 hours a day in the evening, you're probably drifting away a little bit. Now, if you watch the news and maybe one movie every once in a while, okay, there's some sense gratification. But my main activity is we do puja, we offer everything to Krishna, but sometimes there's some sense gratification, go to Disney World or this or that. Well, that means that I'm still, then we can apply the Bhagavatam 11, 20, 27, 28. I still have some attachment for sense gratification, but because of my Krishna conscious practices, I ultimately understand that there's a danger here, and I should feel a little repentant about just engaging in full throttle sense gratification. So that's how I would, I think anyone can see if I'm drifting into sense gratification. And of course, there are more subtle degrees of sense gratification for persons who are more advanced in Krishna consciousness. But at least people in family life should be following the 4 regulated principles and, as much as they possibly can, and should be practicing Krishna consciousness in their daily lives as much as they can. And that means there'll be some progress. And here's a question. It says, I have a question. So that is Parameshwari Devi.
Hare Krishna Gurudeva, reverencias todas y la Prabhupada, todos los pies del loto. In the last classes, you was telling something about we should never think that we have material successful life for our bhakti. So, and you say that if we think that we are, we get wealth life or a very good material life for bhakti, then we lost our bhakti credits or something like this. Can you explain a little more about this?
Well, yeah, the basic point is that we should, otherwise we understand that Krishna consciousness is the goal, and we should always be going toward Krishna consciousness. And therefore, material life, for a devotee, a very serious devotee, there is no material life. Because one of the first principles, which of course Krishna gives in Bhagavad Gita of Krishna consciousness, is to seeing everything connected to Krishna. And when we see everything connected to Krishna, then we can very easily understand that everything has to be utilized in his service. And therefore we use our intelligence. Srila Prabhupada said, intelligence for a non-devotee should be used to try to understand the purpose of life. And for a devotee, it should be understood to use their intelligence, how to understand how to use everything. Not a non-devotee should try to understand that everything should be used. And a devotee should understand, how am I going to use it? Well, and Prabhupada also said the same thing in relation to the guru, that one uses one's intelligence to figure out who is the person who can adequately guide me in spiritual life. And one should use one's intelligence and analyze, not just accept, oh, this person's a guru, therefore I should get initiated. No, one should analyze. Can this person, do they inspire me to go to the next stage of Krishna consciousness by their example, by their words, by their presence? And but after one gets initiated, then one should use one's intelligence. How can I fulfill the instructions of the spiritual master? So it's the same intelligence, but we use it in different ways in relation to the material body and material existence, or in relation to Krishna. I hope that helps to some degree.
Thank you. Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay. Any other question?
Maybe someone has another question. Let's wait a minute. But I was looking
at Facebook, because I don't have Facebook.
Yeah, but I have it broadcasting on YouTube, and I check YouTube.
Oh, on Virtue. Okay.
There's no. It's only 2 persons on.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I was thinking about when you talked about intelligence, and I was reading something yesterday, and I looked up intelligence, and it's funny, but from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it says intelligence is derived from the word angel. So I just thought it was a little bit, funny there. The other thing I was looking at is we were talking about the meat eating, and the meat eating because it exemplifies a position of mercy. But talking about the persons who want to offer it to the goddess Kali, all right, they're whispering a mantra into the air of the goat, and the goat is the only animal allowed. And they're saying, well, I'm killing you now, but you can kill me later. So it's even the practice is that I'm asking. That practice is really to help us, to dissuade us from eating meat. So it's not really like an opportunity, but it's more like a kind of a.
It should be a wake-up call.
Yeah.
But at least it saves one from going to the slaughterhouses, no? And of course, most people that kill the goats, they don't say that mantra. They just kill the goat and eat it, and say, well, I offered it to Kali Ma, so no problem. First time I went to India, I just, one of the first temples I saw was a Kali temple. I mean, of course, this was when we went into Calcutta. I saw the one Kali temple, and I heard all kinds of mantras coming. I thought, oh, a temple, I wasn't very experienced. So I went inside, and it was so horrific. They were actually doing a sacrifice right at that time. And I just went running out of there. And actually, even the priests, they looked like their eyes were like a little crazy. And I was I could see, wow, this is horrible. This is very horrible what they're doing here. So,
right. If there are no more questions.
Well, I have some comment question.
Krishna.
Deva Maharaj, great class. Thank you very much. I hope that we can hear every week some of your classes. They're very enlivened, very nice. So a comment or question is that there is now like 20 million vegan vegetarians in the United States. I think that this has been created by your preaching, His Divine Grace preaching, and how we can relate now to this, because even Prabhupada says that, vegetarian is not, we should not preach vegetarian.
but now in ISKCON, many people, many places, they have yoga practices, like in Manhattan. There's a yoga club. People comes to practice yoga, and they also preach vegetarian. Can you comment, please?
Yes. There are some places in the world, I mean, this is my vision. I can't say this is the absolute truth about this phenomenon. But in some places you can preach Krishna consciousness directly, like India, and people understand because they have that culture. So using yoga, vegetarianism, environment, or whatever, approach as an introduction, as a, but it shouldn't be, it shouldn't, otherwise, if it becomes like the main focus, then it becomes, then we're like just trying to create pious Hindus rather than, especially with yoga. With environment, it may not be so much that, it would be more like looking for people who are sensitive. But with yoga and with vegetarianism, we may just create pious Hindus, and that's not our goal. But of course, the idea is get them in a situation where they're going to chant the Maha Mantra. But then after that, we shouldn't just, anyway, they become friends of Krishna, many of them. And so I guess, one way to preach is just to, hammer in the philosophy. But, that way people it'll be very black or white. Somebody will either take Krishna consciousness or they'll reject it. But I would say it's not a bad approach, because I'm seeing there's so much sense gratification nowadays that if you just, preach only the hardcore preaching that Srila Prabhupada did, and even Srila Prabhupada in some classes, when he was with students, or, he would preach in a very indirect way. I see, very indirect. Of course, he would always mention Krishna, and he would always mention Krishna consciousness. But in some audiences, he would mention it much less than in others. When he was preaching in India, he would, Krishna, Krishna, give this up, stop this. You're all rascals. Preaching to some other group, he would say, you have to be very careful, give very philosophical arguments that they can accept that have really nothing to do with Krishna, but they're just good arguments to bring people to the platform of understanding. And, so I think but the devotees have to be careful that they themselves don't cultivate a mentality that vegetarianism is very wonderful. As Hitler was a vegetarian, and as Prabhupada said many times, monkeys are vegetarian, or mostly vegetarian. The birds are vegetarian, some of them, and rhinoceroses are vegetarian, but we don't aspire to become a rhinoceros or an elephant or a horse or a brontosaurus or whatever.
Thank you very much, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
All right, so if there are no more questions, we do want to thank Guru Prasad Maharaj for his presence today and giving us this lecture. And we will invite him later on again, and I know he graciously accepts. So thank you again, Maharaj, for coming in. And everyone can unmute themselves and they can say Hare Krishna to him.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Srila Prabhupada ki
Hare
jai.
Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Wonderful lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you.
Govinda ki jai. Hare Bol.
Jai.
Hare Bol.
Hare Krishna, Gurudev. Hare Krishna.
Bol Jai. Oh, glory.
Hare Jai. Panchakalpataruvascha.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Jai. Yoga Vaishnava Namo Namo. So I wake up too early in the morning